Donna, you can go ahead and get started.
Hello, I'm Dana, the technical moderator for this panel. I'm just giving you a quick instruction how this is going to work. So first of all, we have rules of conduct. They are really easy. Just be friendly and be respectful. And you can engage. There are different ways to engage. For example, you can use the chat room if you want to comment on the topic, for example, or if you face any technical problems. And the second is there's the hand raise function. And yeah, so if you want to say something, just use it and we're gonna pick you. So that's from me, and now I'm giving the floor to Achim.
Yeah, thank you very much for this technical introduction, Dana, and for taking care of us in this panel regarding technical issues today. Yeah, my name is Achim Wölfel, and I'm working for the German non-profit organization Mehr Demokratie e.V. And Mehr Demokratie is advocating for more citizens' participation, for more direct democracy, and for more transparency in political processes since more than 30 years. And I have the pleasure today to moderate our panel with the title, Will the Youth Push for More Direct Democracy? And before we welcome our four panelists who are here with us today, I'd like to give you a short introduction about the background of today's panel. So what was the idea behind this panel? The idea was that young people, we called them in our introduction text, we called them Generation Z or Generation Alpha, with which we basically mean young fellows born after or around 2000. So they grew up with the internet, they grew up with social media and with digitalization in general, completely naturally. They did not have to learn that, so it was part of their everyday life since they grew up, which is probably the main difference between this generation and older generation or former generations. And what we thought was that they communicate completely different than we used to do because of that. So they have different style. They have a different style of communicating, of building networks, of sharing information, and that is kind of a completely different communication culture. It's a more technology-based communication culture, and our question was, does this new communication culture also lead to a new democratic culture? Does it lead to new forms of democratic participation? Does it lead to a new demand for direct democratic participation opportunities? So this question we want to discuss today with our four panelists, with all of you participants here. And yeah, I'm very happy to have four great panelists here with me today who are all engaged in this topic in different ways, in different organizations, in different jobs they have. And I'd like to introduce them to you. First of all, we have here with us Jason. He's from Fridays for Future. He's engaged in the Fridays for Future Germany movement and Fridays for Future ECI. I think I do not have to say too much about Fridays for Future. Everyone knows that worldwide movement, which started 2018 with students striking for a better climate policy, and which grew since then rapidly. So our next panelist is Sana Godby. She's the co-owner and she's a co-owner and citizen participation consultant of the DigiDem Lab. So DigiDem Lab is a Swedish organization, and they design inclusive processes for citizens' participation. And an example for their work would be the implementation of the online participation platform Consul, in Gothenburg in order to use it for their participatory budget there. And our next panelist is Clevisa. She's from the Montage Initiative, which is an NGO based in the United States, working closely with the United Nations, and they are developing global partnerships. They are promoting and empowering especially young women to determine their own lives through different programs and measures. And our fourth panelist is Leo, and he's a political activism coordinator of IG Europe. IG is one of Europe's biggest students organization with more than 13,000 members, and IG is present in most of the larger cities, and I think all countries, correct me if it's wrong, all European countries. And the aim of IG is to connect young people in order to strive for a democratic, for a diverse, and for a borderless Europe. And yeah, I'm very happy to have you all here. I think I forgot to say that Clevisa is the co-founder and chair of the Students' Advisory Board of the Montage Initiative. So if you know that. Yeah, glad to have all of you here. I'd like to start the discussion now. We have around 40 minutes now for our discussion, and afterwards we have around 30 minutes to for question and answers, for open up our discussion round. Yeah, the first thing would probably be to figure out what is the common ground we are discussing today's question with each other, and what are the different approaches to this question from our panelists. So I'd like to start probably with you, Jason. Can you tell us, what is your approach? What is significant for young? What is significant for young persons for democratic participations?
Yeah, at first, personal hello for me, and thank you for the invitation. I'm glad to be here, and I think I'm, of course you are young, but I think I'm the youngest. I'm still a student, and I can really talk from my personal expectations, how because I'm really young, or I feel young. There are lots of important steps or demands from us for more democracy, and I have a little bit of fear to go into detail, but I think there are of course some benefits of the technology for my democracy, and it's a first very better organization possibility for every movement, for every NGO or movement like Fridays for Future. And I think I can go to this a little bit more in detail if we go to the questions. But I think it's also important to tell that there are also some risk, and I don't want to feel like a boomer and just say, oh, the internet and the technologies are all bad, but I think it's not something new for you. We all heard about it, but my experience, we also have lots of let me call it stupid people who have the possibility to give their opinions in the internet. And yes, it's also a big risk, but also a big possibility. So if you look at Donald Trump, so maybe it's not the best example, but who is it if he hasn't Twitter? So he can give statements and he can give his ideas of whatever. But so it's a form of democracy to tell everyone every time what I'm thinking about what's happening in the world. And if I'm a person like Donald Trump, I have a great influence, and if it do Angela Merkel too, she would also have a great influence. I don't think that she would do it. And yeah, so I don't want to go too much into detail, but that's also have, of course, benefits like Fridays for Future organize about digital and so on, so on. And maybe to come to a point, I think, yes, it sounds so easy, but we have really big chances, but they also have, if used by the wrong persons, like every time negative yeah, things for all of us. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, Jason. I'd like to go on with the same question. What is significant in terms of democratic participation and young persons? Senna, would you go on?
Yes, sure. I'd also like to say hello to everyone. I'm glad that there's a lot of people here, even though it's a digital forum, which is not always as exciting as face-to-face meetings, but I feel the presence of you all anyways, and I'm very happy to see you. So for me, what I think is the most important thing to really engage young people in decision-making and in participation is real power and real trust. Like what we see, I work with, as was mentioned before, we work with cities in Sweden, but also internationally. So we work with a lot of municipalities in order to convince them to engage young people. And what we see is that a real problem and why young people aren't participating is because there's no real power involved. So a big problem that we see is that there's often dialogues or citizen dialogues where you say that, okay, we're going to build this new square in the city, or we're going to remodel the school or this housing neighborhood, and we put in like an ad in the newspaper in a time where no one can show up, and then maybe 3 people show up and they try to express their opinion, and it's not really heard. And we see that young people, they try all the time to invest resources and to show politicians and decision makers what they need and what they want, but they're not really listened to. Their ideas aren't really taken seriously. So the biggest problem is, of course, trust. And the only way to create trust is to give the young people real power. And so that's something that we do a lot and we kind of try to change the culture of democracy. A concrete example taken from Sweden is that the state did an investigation of the state of democracy. So what they found was that only 2% of the Swedish population is politically active in a political party today. And of those 2%, there's barely any young people. So if representative democracy is the only way to raise your voice and put in proposals, that means that barely no young people are in those rooms where the decisions are made. And what we have to do is to put young people in those rooms. It may be city council, but it also may be in actual decision-making processes, such as remodeling squares, such as deciding over the city budget, deciding over real money, real decisions. And we have a lot of examples that I can talk about later of how you can do that, and examples of what we have done together with cities. But I would say that that's my main point. And of course, I work with digital tools and platforms, but I don't think they are magical solutions. I don't think that if a city installs a digital platform, then you will magically increase the participation of young people just because they use social media. It's all about trust. If they don't trust the city, they're not going to use any tool. It doesn't matter what tool you're using. So that's what I want to say.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's go on with your statement, Clarissa.
Great, thank you so much. I want to say thank you to Democracy International, to the partner organizations, to the moderator Ashim and fellow panelists, and all of you at the audience for being here. It's such an honor to be at the online forum on modern democracy, speaking on a complex topic, the intersection between youth, technology, and direct democracy. Just another quick intro about me. I'm the co-founder and chair of the Student Advisory Board at Montage Initiative. In answering this question, I know Yason mentioned the importance of technology and which allows for greater organization. And Sana, right now you spoke with some very specific examples of real power. I want to focus on the qualities of youth today that make them so significant and so unique for democracy, and so crucial. So I believe that the significance of democracy with respect to youth is that young people are one, the single most important group that have the most at stake from government decisions, meaning that those decisions will affect young people's future the longest. And 2, young people have the greatest potential. So when I say potential, I mean that young people, we're seeing the rise of a highly conscious and aware generation Z and Alpha. They're highly educated and concerned about the issues of today, and they're very vocal about it, such as environmental sustainability. With Yes on or Fridays for Future, we've seen that very clearly and very well. Young people also have the energy, willpower, optimism, the volition for change, and open-mindedness that's nearly unmatched in older generations. We're not seeing anything like this before. I can speak from the example of the youth assembly programs at the Friendship Ambassadors Foundation, where I also work, which I get to meet with and work with hundreds of young people from over 100 countries that are all doing fantastic initiatives and projects abroad in their own communities. And another thing with technology is that youth help to prompt change faster in democracy. That's because young people can keep up with changes and norms through technology and actually create them. Young people are the first embracers of technology. They're the first to grasp the technological future. We're seeing this with social media activism, for example. Again, going back to Yason's point on using social media to organize. So I do think that young people's potential with respect to democracy could lead to greater policies for problem solving of major world issues, such as environmental sustainability, gender and racial equality, because young people have repeatedly proven that they're so highly in tune with these issues. And it translates to faster and more effective change with the use of technology. And I'm sure we're going to be hearing a lot more how that's the case from Sana. And at the Montage Initiative where I work, we already know all of this. We get this. And that's why at Montage Initiative, we have the Student Advisory Board, where we put young people at the center of the organization's decision-making. For strategy, for organizational policies, for the direction of the organization. Young people are organizers at our events, they do fundraising, so they're involved in every component and direction of the organization. I'd like to see something like this at a much broader scale in democracy and in countries, not just in my small nonprofit organization. The Student Advisory Board, I think, could serve as a good model or prototype or pilot for bigger projects. It's very similar to an actual advisory board where you get these boards at multinational companies, for example, they hold and wield all of the power. And you can do that, imagine if you can do that with young people and the potential that there is there. So putting young people at the center of decision-making holds very crucial importance.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Clarissa. All right, I'd like to give the word to Leo as the next speaker from our panel. Leo.
Yeah, well, actually, I'm going to find it a bit hard to follow that all of that up, because it's pretty much essentially along the lines of what I wanted to approach, especially the part about trust. In AIG, I've been part of multiple projects involving getting people involved in elections, especially for the European elections. And trust is probably the biggest problem there is that at least I could recognize with people. It's just that they didn't trust the people that even they wanted to elect to then be representative in the correct manner, because in a certain way, young people are usually always put aside when it comes to political objectives. It's a very useful demographic to preach to, but it's never useful demographic to actually achieve things for. And that's a thing that most young people realize. Most politicians might not, but young people realize that most of the times they're just being used for political agendas. And so yeah, a very important factor is essentially changing the behavior within, within parties, within organizations as well, institutions, in including young people within decision-making processes. And that means apart from voting, or apart from just giving, I don't know, an internship opportunity for one lucky student out of 100. It's more than that, because even then, if an intern does get through, if that person is unlucky, it's a politician that just wants a personal assistant that just listens and does his work or her work or their work. In any case, that's a thing that really impacts young people in terms of democracy. They need to realize, or at least they need to be involved in the processes actively outside of the usual typical methods that one would be active in society. So yeah, that would be my first point.
Yeah, thank you, Leo. Thank you all of our panelists for your statements and for your perspectives on our today's issue. I think we have a lot of different points we could dive into deeper. Probably we can go on with the question about, does the status quo right now, or is our democratic system right now prepared for young voters and their demands, in their democratic demands? Because some of you, I mean, Leo and Senna, especially, you spoke about trust, which is very important. Also, Jason and Tevisa, you said that there are specific areas which we can improve. So probably the answer goes in some direction. But anyway, I'd like to ask you, is our system prepared right now for the democratic demand of young persons? And if not, what could we change? So probably we start now the other way around with you, Leo, because you made that point also very strong.
Yeah. Well, personally, I don't think it's the case that any system really is prepared for young people, for at least the demands of young people. For example, I would use the European elections of last year as an example for that, where most of the times, and of course this is more of a, let's say, common knowledge between people who engage in European politics, every nation has its own electoral system. Every nation very much tries not to really explain how you participate within their country. Last time, the European Union did something very useful, which was a kind of guide where you could input what nationality you were and where you had to vote. So whether you lived in Germany or in Italy and so on, and the possibilities of actually how do you get involved into this. But most of the times, if you want to find out how to participate or how to vote or how to get somewhere, you have to go to an archaic website from 2001 that has been updated maybe once or twice and just looks like a huge legal text rather than an actual explanation of how processes work. And that's a first step. It's people don't trust the system because the system doesn't provide the information for it to be trustworthy. And I think that's really the first step in that. You cannot start anything without the information, at least providing it. Now, of course, there's also different issues as well. But principally, it's that our democratic processes as they are now are not providing the correct amount of information to young people. And it's not only through websites or whatever, through even informational stuff, non-formal education, activities, all of that is lacking. And in most European countries, maybe in Estonia, not as much, especially since they implemented their e-voting. But yeah, I mean, it doesn't really balance out as much if one country, at least in Europe, if one country out of, well, in the European Union, let's be specific, if one country out of 27 is doing the right stuff, but all of the others aren't. So yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very, very much, Leo. Yeah, so your statement is that basically the information policy is lacking, information are lacking for young people in order to participate, in short. So Senna, what do you think? Is our democratic system prepared for young voters, for young persons wanting to participate?
I think the main problem with the way democracy works today is that it's based on elections, and that's not realistic. Like I was talking about before, democracy is so much more than elections. It's you know, elections are once every 4 years, and it's not really involvement because you vote for a political party that's supposed to represent you in every single issue, and that's not realistic. That's why I don't work with elections. I work with everything but elections. So to create everyday democracy, and that's for me what's wrong with the system today, that it's not made for how people work, how young people work. Like if you're very dedicated to the climate issue, for example, you don't, why is the system made so that you have to join a political party to then have to implement real solutions? It's like we have to create other ways to for young people to be able to put forward their proposals and suggestions. And there are concrete solutions. I work with concrete solutions every day. Participatory budgeting is an example that I really believe in, which is concrete because you take actual money, you take parts of a city's budget, or it can be a school's budget, or a housing company's budget, or a nation's budget, and you ask people, what do you want to do with this money? And there are so many examples. There are examples where you do that. For example, in Cascais, they're doing a participatory budget around the climate with only young people, where they put in proposals to how they want to invest into the climate issues. There are examples of participatory budgets that I'm working with schools, where you actually ask students, young students. I'm working with 6-year-olds towards 12-year-olds, where we ask them, what type of activities do you want to do before school, after school, during school, instead of teachers making those decisions. We work with housing companies where tenants are involved in the budgets, and they say what they want the housing companies to invest in. We work with cities where we actually, where young people are the ones that say how they want their parks to look like. They're involved in building their culture houses. And I mean, this is all based on research. For example, to actually make effective politics, they have to be based on real needs. So for example, if you want to build a house, a cultural house, a space where you want young people to join activities, then the most effective way to have that house working is for it to be based on actual interests and actual needs of the young people. And it's not really rocket science. It's like, it's better decision making when all decisions are based on the real needs of people. And the only way for them to be based on the real needs of people is for us to use participatory democracy, direct democracy, where you actually create systems for people to very easily propose what they want for their local neighborhoods, and not only, be involved in elections. And I can use myself as an example. I was 21 years old when I got into city council, and I was the only young person in Gothenburg, in the city council of Gothenburg. They've never had, like, I'm much older now, but back then it was very weird. And everyone was white. It was mainly men. It was 4 years of trying to, talk in rooms where everyone was so much older than me, and those spaces weren't made for young people. The language wasn't made for young people, for regular people. The city system, how municipalities work, it's not really public knowledge. A lot of people don't know how decisions are made. And the only way to kind of to create popular knowledge where people learn how the system works is for them to practice democracy. And so, yeah, I believe in, continuing to as well engage people to get into city council and those rooms, like we see with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, like a person that actually got in and got a conservative old person out, and suddenly is using her social media account to like make politics relevant for people. I believe in that as well, but I also believe in everyday democracy as well.
Thank you very much for this strong statement, and also for showing already some paths democracy could go and should focus more on. And the next person I'd like to ask the question is Clevisa. What do you think? Was our democratic system prepared for young persons?
Yes, so I definitely agree with Leo's first point, and that's actually going to be my first point as well about information communication online by governments. And definitely Sana already taking us to some great solutions and the importance of participatory methods with diverse stakeholders. And I'm just going to answer the question also very briefly. No, direct democracy and overall democratic processes aren't prepared for young people's participation and the way that young people engage and communicate online and youth's behavior. There seems to be a gap between youth engagement and technological style versus traditional government pathways for decision making. And the first point, just like Leo said, is that information communication online by governments is not youth friendly. It's actually not even layperson friendly. So unless you're a professional lawyer or a politician, you're going to struggle trying to understand that information. What I mean when I talk about that is that in respect to language, the formatting of the website, the user interface, social media communication, that is not youth friendly. I can give my own experience with this. When I voted, last time I voted on a referendum on the ballot, it was about 6 lines long. There were double negatives, there was legal jargon, and I had to read it several times to understand what it was saying. And none of us had even been prepared that this referendum was going to be on the ballot, or it may have been archaic somewhere. I come from a political science background. I have a bachelor's and a master's in political science and international affairs, and I struggled understanding what that meant, let alone my parents who are voting right behind me, and English is their second language and they're immigrants, and anybody else who doesn't come from that sort of background. And that's just not acceptable. We know what works with youth for young people. There are numerous studies online. We know young people prefer online services. You know how we use technology all the time, but the online services are not there. You still need to book an appointment 6 months in advance and then show up to wherever for a simple appointment for a service that could easily be done online, the way Estonia has figured out how to do that sort of service, provide service and goods online in that way. And I do agree that with Sana, there are many fantastic opportunities for engagement online and in person that could be done on behalf of the government, such as prompting dialogues or opinion polls or focus groups to get input into many different topics. So we need these participatory methods a lot more. I know in New England, the New England area of the United States, we do have a lot of town halls, but again, the same issue that Sana pointed out is that they're not youth-friendly spaces. It's usually, they're focused on very small, narrow topics. And usually it's older people that show up at the town hall meetings, if you even know about them. So opening those spaces up and making them more youth-friendly will be very important. Of course, technological overhaul through the online services and everything takes a lot of time and resources. In the US, we are far from it. But let alone in developing countries which have even fewer resources to enact such technological change, where there is no access to technology often, or there is no internet, or there is not even energy. So the difficulties and challenges that we're talking about are compounded in developing countries.
Okay, thank you very much for sharing your experience and giving us this interesting perspective. Before I ask you, Jason, the question, I would like to say that there are already many questions in the chat, and we'd like to discuss those questions in 15 to 20 minutes then at the end together, like in order to keep up the flow of the discussion. Still write your questions down. That's perfect like that, so we can pick them up later and discuss them together. So Jason, what do you think? Is our democratic system, are our democratic systems prepared for young people wanting to participate? I think you are silenced.
Yeah, sorry. At first, I think if you really say, yeah, our system works great and the youth is involved great, we won't sit here and discuss about it. And I want to tell you an example from the Brexit. I don't know if you heard about it, but there's, I think, a movie or a series made about the Brexit. And there's one sentence of one of the people who pushed the Brexit who says there are millions of people in the UK and they're using every day their technical devices, and the established policy doesn't know of them, and we have to contact them, and then we reach or then we get more or big people beyond us. And to be honest, I don't know how big the influence of those unknown persons was, but I think that's a good example to say we have lots of people who aren't involved, and if they're involved, things can be changed very quick and to a very other side. And I think that's a great chance. And I have the experience every day how young people are not involved in politics. As you said before, I'm sitting often with my politics in my town and talk to people who are maybe 40, 50 years older than me always. And I feel how hard it is to get involved, to be there and to discuss. And they always say, no, we can't do it and like this. And I have the feeling that the established parties doesn't have the will to involve us young persons. And that's the first point. Second, I'm totally in common with you what you say about there's no trust and there are too less information. That's a very big point. But I see a third problem also in our in my generation. So I think we have two big difference group. That one who are really politic and want to be involved, like you and of Fridays for Future or every other NGOs, and that one who are completely not interested. So completely they don't interested about the neighborhood. And there's I don't want to like gap, but there's a big difference. And the policy yes, it's using it, and it say, oh, so you are just the group who are interested and who are not interested, and so we won't involve you. Or when you say yes, but we are interested, they say, yeah, but we can do that. And so it's a big problem also of our generation. But I think there would be many easy ways to solve it and to involve the people and the young people who have the willing to get active.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much, Jason. So we've heard from our panelists that there are many different construction sites regarding the opportunities to engage, to participate for young persons. So many of you mentioned already that we need opportunities to participate beside elections every couple of years. So there were the buzzwords participatory democracy and direct democracy. And what is your approach? Do you think if we develop those ways to participate, do we need the structures, and then the structures will lead to more young participation? Or do the young people have to participate more and then demand for those structures? What has to be first? Which approach do we need? I don't know, to fix some of those construction sites we talked about, like the information lack, like the problems with different languages, like the not diverse groups of people participating. Which approach would you recommend us? Probably Leo, you can start with this question.
Sorry, can you repeat more or less? So whether what ways we could use to fix this, essentially.
Like, do we need to improve now the channels on which people can participate, like direct democratic opportunities and participatory democratic opportunities, and then more people will participate? Or do we have to increase other things before, like engage more people to participate politically, and then this will follow?
Yeah. Well, out of my experience, it's better to create the structures beforehand, just because usually the way it works, at least with student associations, the ones I know of, like Jeff, ESN, actually anything that fits under the European Youth Forum. The way it works is that it's the engaged people who create the processes that will then further participation for everybody else. So essentially, it's up to us, let's say, the people who already are engaged, to propose very specific processes or methods for decision makers, states, cities, regions, whoever you want to, in many cases also organizations, NGOs, have the same issues in terms of participation for young people. So sometimes it's just better to create a tool. For example, I think 2 years ago, I actually created a tool for organizations to become more gender friendly, so about gender mainstreaming. And with this, we as AEG then put ourselves into the field, actively making sure that other organizations and other relevant parties within essentially really civil society more than anything, were able to grasp the correct understanding of what is to do to get more people engaged because of, say, their lack of information within the gender mainstreaming area. So, for example, now for politics or for participation, this would mean essentially creating a tool, a team that is always there, prepared to essentially adapt and go with the flow, essentially, of what is happening at the moment. And that, of course, sure, it's possible that you can do that with quite a lot of older people. I mean, to be honest, that only requires a certain analytical mind, but the idea is that you cannot fully understand it until you are actually part of the group itself. So it would require young people to fully comprehend the potential and to fully develop tools such as, let's say, an activity plan that would involve young people on the street or digitally. It would require a young person to be able to say, at least one young person, to review it, to say, you know what, I don't think anybody's going to look at that. Totally boring. Nobody's really going to do that, or something like that. You know, it's a process for sure, and it's maybe even a long one, but it's a process that has to be able to change. So it's not like you can say, okay, now we're going to make this nice little tool, or we're going to make these activities that are going to promote young people's engagement within our city, our region, our state. And we're just going to leave it at that. We're going to leave it there. From time to time, we're going to have some nice events. You actually need to have somebody who's full-time responsible on it, that always can adapt to the environment around it, which in most cases is not the case. There's usually a youth responsible, but with very limited resources and essentially no team. And then they're on their own trying to figure out how to get young people on board in processes, and that just doesn't work.
Okay. All right, thank you very much. Yeah. It sounds a little bit like the approach the Montage Initiative is following, like already implementing a structure and giving young people the opportunity to directly, participate. So is that right? Is that the approach you're choosing there, Clevisa?
Yes, definitely. And so, as Leo just said, you need to have the structure first to have the input from young people. But I would actually argue, especially with what we've done with Montage Initiative, is that there's no time to wait for structure or for the government to come up with the systems and for then young people to be involved. You need both happening at the same time. And I know that's the cheap and easy way to answer this question. But youth participation and input helps to inform the pathways and the tools. So when my co-founder, Sharon Pedrosa, and I, we went to the CEO, the president of the organization, we said, we'd like to do this. And then we created the structure. That was input from young people, and then creating a structure with the hierarchy that already existed there. So both need to be happening at the same time because they are mutually reinforcing. And once with the input of young people, governments can then help to create and enable more youth participation through processes that they create, again, that are informed by the opinions of young people. Now, I do have just a lot of thoughts about what governments can do to help bridge that gap between young people's participation and what young people should be doing, but they all have to be happening in tandem. So for instance, government has to allow for some structure, have direct democracy processes to begin with. We know in the United States, only some states have direct democracy elements and then others don't. For example, California holds referenda normally and regularly, while other states don't. We know that the governments can definitely improve on their communications, on their social media outreach for young people, on their language, on having more online processes the way Estonia does. I would say I would like to bring in COVID-19 here as we are in the middle of a pandemic. And the pandemic has helped to hasten some of the online transitions. So now there are more resources available online, at least with the US government, and there are more processes and services that are being done online, but it's an extremely slow transition. It's certainly not enough. There's a lot of room there. And governments can also help to reduce and remove some of the barriers that are impeding young people from participating. We know, for example, to set up an initiative, you need a high number of signatures, which often requires a lot of organization. It requires resources and money to get a lot of people to sign your initiative. And young people have the lowest amount of resources, the lowest amount of money, and the smallest networks. So that harms young people more. Reducing barriers to what can be more reasonable and workable for young people is another opportunity for governments. And of course, I heard Sana mention Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. We need to have youth champions in the government because young leaders such as Obama and AOC, they resonate well with young people themselves who can identify with them, and then they feel inspiration and encouragement to move forth. That is part of the rationale of quotas for women. If you're a woman and you see other women who are in power, that'll help propel you forward. So we need to be seeing these young leaders and young champions. And that's a little bit about what can be done on the part of the government to help bridge the gap. And I have some thoughts on what young people should be doing themselves, but I will leave it at that to not go over time.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much. Also the pledge for, I heard the pledge for cooperation, for seeking for cooperation with other organizations as well, but also developing strongly the structures. Jason, what would you say in this context?
Yeah, it's difficult. So Fridays for Future, every time that we won't work with any party because there are some points in our world that some problems that have to be fixed very quick, like the climate change. But that's not the only problem. There are so much else. Like we have so many countries where the human rights are really held on, and so there are some points we have to fix quick. And I think the democracy, how it's in the moment in Germany, how it's in the moment in the EU, it's not, it's very calm, and we say, yeah, okay, we look what happened. And I think, yes, Leo, you're right. We need to have structure to get a new generation who is in the parliaments and to work. That's, I'm common with you, but at some points we need a quick democracy. We need some more referendums, and we have the possibility of petitions. And so I'm working for the European Citizens Initiative from Fridays for Future. But even if we collect at the minimum of 1 million signatures, it just be like, okay, you just look at it, and if they say, no, it's no. So it's a very small chance to be involved, and it's not quick, and we have it, or especially it's my bubble, it's environment. For the climate change, for our future, we have to fight for it very at the moment, and we can't wait for the next 2 and 20 years or for the next generation. And so we have the people, of course, we have them who want to be involved, and we can them involved, and we need the structure who want to be, for those who want to be, who wants to sit in the parliaments and to vote for different things and to new laws. And that's a very big and a very important part of our democracy. Don't misunderstand me. We need this. We need this to, don't that we have, such as if you look at the German history, that we have suddenly a person like Hitler. We don't want that again. And for that, it's great that our democracy is, not quick. But at some points, it must be the possibility to fix problems at the moment. And mehr Demokratie in Germany works for referendums in Germany. And I think that also could be a good idea, maybe a good idea for the EU, that we have there a referendum. And yeah, I think a lot of democratic work is out of the parliament. It's on the street, on demonstration, on protests, on campaigns at NGOs. And we have to strengthen both. We have to strengthen the structure for the parliaments, and we have to strengthen the democracy of the streets.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much. Senna, what do you say? Do we, like, especially in terms of a fast and slow democracy, where are the advantages and disadvantages of the direct and participatory ways of participation, and where are the advantages and disadvantages of the more electoral based or focused ways of participation?
I would say that for me, democracy, like real democracy works, has to be several legs. It can't be, one way, like some of you were talking about. I believe that we have to work on several fronts, and that's kind of what we do in my organization. So one leg is the government leg, where you're kind of trying to change the way government works, and that's by changing the way civil servants and politicians think and how they view their citizens. That, for example, not seeing them as clients, or not seeing them as people that things are happening to, or that you're informing, but to actually see them as people that need to, they're the ones that are gonna have the real needs, and you have to listen to their needs and build your city based on their needs. And that's what I've been talking about before, by creating structures within the city for participatory budgeting, for citizen assemblies, for citizen proposals, having digital platforms like we've seen Decidim and Consul from Madrid and Barcelona, that were created after the 15M movement, the 15M movement, where these platforms are very broad participation platforms, where you as a citizen can do everything from putting in citizen proposals to like giving ideas towards the city budget, towards citizen urban planning. So that's one leg. And then the other leg is the representative democracy leg. And that needs to change as well, because it's not representative. Like we see that underrepresented communities that have a history of being oppressed, of having high mistrusts, are not represented in city councils, in parliaments, for example. And that is for a reason. It's because of history, of the way we've created these, how we've created politics, how we created the parliaments. They were not based on everyone participating. They were based on a small group participating. They're not accessible towards people that don't have a high education, like you were talking about before. They're not accessible to people of color. They're not accessible to women or transgender people, for example. They are based on, old ideas of how representative democracy works. So that's why we have to change that. And the reason why I mentioned AOC before is that I see more and more initiatives where politicians try to kind of make politics more transparent and try to show what's happening within our governments in a more accessible language, and to invite people to understand policies. So I really agree with what some of you have been talking about with representation. Is so important to see yourself represented in politicians as well. So that's why that's an important leg as well. And then the third leg is, of course, like always having grassroots, like linking it to civil society, linking it to everyone that's not inside government or that's not inside city council. And that's something that a lot of politicians and a lot of initiatives I see are missing, like they lose their connection to the grassroots. And that's why you have to have all of these three at all times in order to create real democracy. And I mean, there are so many examples of how you can do that, but I think the most important recommendation for how to build that kind of movement is that you have to shape it around your own local context. So, and for example, what happened in Spain will probably not happen in Sweden, because the Swedish culture is very different from the Spanish culture. Like we in the Nordic countries are not social at all. We're not, hanging out in squares, and it's not really where I don't see that happening in the same way. But something that we do have in Sweden that I see that other countries don't have, like Spain, is that people mobilize within sporting associations, within churches or local associations. So for example, in our case, maybe we're not gonna mobilize and sit on the square, but we're gonna work with our local associations and try to mobilize them. So I think that's very important, that you have to see in your own country, where are people, which ways do you have to engage with people, and you have to engage with people in the way that they're used to, in the way that where they are, basically. If it is on social media, if it is in the local squares, if it is in your school or your housing company, or wherever, you have to be where the people are. Yeah, so that's basically it. And also regarding, I just want to say one last thing. I think something that we are also looking at a lot is, civic tech initiatives. Like, for example, we started something called Civic Tech Sweden here in Sweden, because we saw that a lot of technology is usually created by startups and companies, and they're not created by grassroots. They're not created by, they're not needs-based. They're capital-based, where the money is. So that's very important as well when it comes to technology. Like, you have to really work together with civil society, and you have to work together with like young people to create the tools that they see that they need. And there are a lot of examples of that as well.
Okay, all right. Yeah, thank you very much. I think that's perfectly fitting with our time schedule, that we now finished the second round of questions. Dana, I see Dana nodding. That means I have I have her go for starting now the question and answer round. And there have already been a couple of questions in our chat. And yeah, just if you have more questions, just write them down in the chat, but you can also raise your hand, and Dana or I will see you and then answer your questions, or give your questions into the round. I would like to start with a question pretty much from the beginning, and from Olu Watoyin. I hope I pronounced your name right. And the question was, I think involving young people into democracy needs a lot of encouragement and strong awareness and sensitization and capacity building and so on. And in my country, Nigeria, we still have such challenges, and young people are not really encouraged to go near the democracy process. So what would you answer on that question? How can more young people be brought to politics, or encouraged to go into politics, to participate? Feel free to answer who thinks he or she can answer. I see Clevisa, so maybe you start. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, thank you for bringing up that point, because it is one of the main things that I wanted to talk about. And one answer that I consistently hear from young people is education. Education is seen as a panacea for many things, and it can very well come close to that. So what is important is mainstreaming civil participation by young people through the school and education systems. We know our organizations, our NGOs are doing fantastic work, but we don't have the reach and the grasp the way that national governments or state and local governments have, through reaching virtually every citizen from their youth, from childhood age to later age. So what we need from schools is to be able to train young people in knowledge of direct democracy processes. And that means we need practical education going beyond just the theoretical. Here is your constitution and here are your branches of government. But rather, young people in classes need to be able to go on websites to practice voting simulations, to practice setting up their own referenda or initiatives in their own class, to doing workshops and trainings by NGOs like class projects. Those need to come into the schools to help mainstream that. Schools also need to be able to prepare young people for online etiquette, for respectful and ethical engagement in the virtual world, because that's so important as we're seeing interaction and rhetoric that's being thrown around in the United States. Schools need to be able to reinforce skills in discerning quality and reliable information sources so young people can be informed and know what the facts are on the ground. This is especially in the era of fake news as we have it, or alternate facts and realities that are happening in the United States. Some of you may be foreign with some of these concepts, but believe me, where I am, they're everywhere. And of course, we need young people, in addition to the education and mainstreaming all of these ideas and thoughts to young people, we then need young people to take these tools and to continue taking action and shaping the world through their own initiatives and projects, through their own online conversations. Very often I've seen young people that come to my team and I at the youth assembly, and they ask, okay, I'm here, I want to volunteer, but I don't know where to start. And that's what we need from young people, to inform themselves, to be educated, to be acquainted, and to try to learn the process, to learn the technicalities in order to propose solutions. So those are my main points: education, mainstreaming, and then young people doing the hard work themselves.
Yeah, thanks, Clarissa. Are there any additions from the other panelists? Jason is raising his hand. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm completely in common with you. I just want to say that I think that's a big task for our government and for our school system. And in Germany, they say the goal of our school system is to have oriented and democratic citizens after school is finished. And I don't see it that's given now in Germany. And I have the same idea of you, and I think we just have to go and to go and fix lots of problems in schools. We can improve them a lot, and we can say, okay, if I just show you how interesting and how cool is it to be involved in democracy, and not just you have to get a good mark. Then there's an interest and there's a willing to also not just for the knowledge and to learn something, also to get active. And yes, that's my point. I just want to say to you, I think we have to appeal to our governments to change our school systems fundamentally in another direction. And yeah, I think that's also an important demand.
Yeah, thanks. Sana?
I just wanted to give a concrete example. I was saying before that we're working with schools. So we're working with PB in schools, participatory budgeting right now. And so we're training teachers and giving them actual materials and resources on how to, during lessons, like we're creating lesson plans for teachers where they during, for example, civics, studies, or whatever English classes or whatever relevant topic they have, they talk about participation. They talk about like they give them an introduction to what participation is. But then the most important thing is that they're actually doing a process within the school. So they give in this example, recent example, they have like 10,000 euros where students can create proposals during lessons, during school. So they go out to their local communities, they do interviews, they talk with people in the streets to learn about the needs of the community. They maybe interview other classes, they do a study of the neighborhood to see what things could be needed for our school to improve our school. And then they create their proposals and they learn as they do. So they talk to politicians, they talk to relevant people, they do research, they write up their proposals, they create budgets, and then they vote. So the entire school votes and the proposals that most students like get implemented. So that's a way of actually within a school creating a very concrete way for students to learn about democracy, because I don't think it's enough to talk about it in theory. Like what actually makes people excited is when you see a proposal be implemented, something that you yourself proposed and you see it happening, that's when you actually think that it's worth me participating. And that's what we see when we look at research from these type of processes, that it leads to young people actually being more involved in politics because they see that their opinion matters.
Okay, thank you very much. So that's a really interesting example of a positive example making democratic experience. That's what we always say here when we speak about advocating for more direct and participatory democracy, that we say people need to experience positive democracy experiences, so they will do it again and again and strive for it. So are there any additions to this point here from the panelists as well as from the participants in the round? So can you probably tell us something about very positive democracy experiences you made? Is there any experience you say, okay, I need to share that with you here? No.
Sorry, are you asking us if we have more examples?
I'm quite sure you have a lot of examples.
Yeah, I have like 100. So don't I don't dare to open the Pandora's box. But basically, my job is to create these examples, so I can give you as many as you want. Just name the country, and I'll give you an example.
Yeah, I mean, you would be the next ones I would ask the panelists, because I'm sure you have a lot of examples. Probably also participants from the panel have some examples they want to share. We can have a look into the round. You can also unmute yourselves and raise your voice. That is the case right now, but I do not see anyone raising his hand. Okay, that's fine as well. Probably later on there will be some examples from the round. So maybe we can go on with another question from our chat. In the beginning, Donald O'Brolchain asked a very specific question to Clevisa. The question was around what Montage is doing right now. So probably you can repeat that a little bit. The question was, does Montage involve young people on a student's advisory board? And if so, who is the main board of Montage? And do young people, students, sit on the main board? Is such one?
Yes, definitely. I saw that question. And I can say a little bit about Montage Initiative. We're a small nonprofit organization that has operations in the United States and also in countries such as India with partner organizations. We focus on women's empowerment economically and helping to build peace through women. So that's a bit of the background of the organization. Now, in terms of organization structure, if you think about the organizational chart, we have a main advisory board, and then we have a student advisory board. Similar to like a youth board. So basically our main advisory board does, they contribute the main finances of the organization, and they make the main decisions about any hiring or the people who are involved. But those very same duties that the main board has, our student advisory board has. So the two boards meet together at least a couple of times a year to help decide the organization, to help decide the direction of the organization, to help decide which activities and events will be on, and also in terms of planning. But when it comes to executing the actual events, for example, we've hosted several events at the United Nations. We have consultative status with the UN ECOSOC, which is the United Nations Economic and Social Council. So we're always at the United Nations Commission on the Status of Women, hosting events there, doing presentations, working with other nonprofit organizations. And a lot of that is executed by our Student Advisory Board. So while we have youth leaders, myself and my co-founder, who's now the vice chair, Sharon Pedrosa, we also bring other young people. And we do the same exact roles that a regular board does. So we recruit, we help to give input into what the organization will be doing next. We help to give input into the strategy, and our voices and thoughts are taken into consideration. So when Ashim asked about examples, about democratic examples, this is one small example. I only hesitated to use it because it's for an NGO, a small NGO, versus like a broader government school system example. But that type of activity that you can bring into schools. You can bring it to like a student board at universities. There are many different university clubs or high school clubs that have those sorts of leadership positions for young people.
Okay, thank you very much for this clarification of what Montage does, and for this examples we could use and learn from. Are there any additions in that direction? Otherwise, we could go on with our next question we have from our chat group. Let's see. What do we have here? We have spoken about this question here. Then there was a question from Cecile. I think she wrote that she already had to leave the chat. That doesn't matter for us. She said, is there any specific researches, analyses and documentations about the level of young generations' participation in democratic processes in the European Union and beyond? I think that was, when she asked that, it was during a part of Senna, when you spoke about some numbers, I think, about who is participating politically. Joe Matthews already answered in the chat a little bit to this question. However, I would like to ask the question to you here in the round, maybe to you, Senna, first.
Okay, so when I was giving some numbers, it was an investigation they did in Sweden, so it's in Swedish. So if you know Swedish, it's called Demokratiutredningen, the democracy investigation. And so it's basically about the context in Sweden, but I'm sure that there's a lot of research in overall Europe as well. I can't really recite any specific researchers now, but we have a lot of, examples. Like the research I work with is mainly around specific participation methods, like, and not so much like general election related research. So maybe if other people have examples.
All right. Thank you very much. So now I had the time to read Joe Matthews' answer a little bit more focused. So he brings in another perspective I'd like to share with you. He says, let me sound a dissonant note. Surveys and research, notably by Professor Munk and FOA, suggest that the world's young people are also weakest in support for democracy. So significant pluralities of young people prefer military dictatorship to democracy. More than a quarter of US millennials don't support free elections. What do you think? I'm asking the panelists first and then the whole round. What do you think explains such findings? And why are we certain that young people are democratic allies? So it's probably a challenging question right now. So Leo, I see your hand, yeah. And then Plevisa, I also have you on the radar.
Well, I mean, is very complicated, mostly, well, I mean, yes and no. There's various parts to it, that's for sure. Not necessarily all complicated, but a big part of it is, of course, education. And just this thing we were talking about before, that representation doesn't necessarily, like voting someone who represents you doesn't necessarily mean that they will be doing the things that are useful for you. For example, in Italy, there's this pretty big case that in Northern Italy, there's quite a lot of supporters for the Northern League within young people. And not only the Northern League, but the Brothers of Italy, which is essentially a semi-fascist party. With these, let's say, underlying ambitions of having like a similar dictatorship-like government style, and it forms up from different points. This kind of support from young people. It's their delusion with the overall political system, for example, in Italy, it's that there's not a lot of progress in terms of youth politics quite a lot of times, no matter what party you elect. Youth programs are not put into action, everything is very slow, and so on. And of course, this creates malcontent towards everything, to be fair, and add a bad education system to it, and you essentially have your recipe for strongman politics, essentially the basis for it. And it's that's why it forms up. It's essentially a neglect of politics towards young people, and this is what happens. And then it's, of course, it ends up being our responsibility to take these people and to turn them around. For example, we had at an event where we were discussing proposals for the European Union, we had a Brexiteer that at the end decided he had hope again, although he had already voted for Brexit. So, I mean, a bit late, but at least, you know, there is a possibility of essentially turning that around.
Okay, thanks. So next persons I have on my list, Clevisa and then Sana.
Yeah, that's a very difficult point and question, but an important one that has to be addressed. It's almost like the elephant in the room. It's not all about opportunities on weekend, but there are like these serious challenges to this point of view. I think it's best to look at the representative studies about what they say about opinion polls. And of course, that varies in different countries. So just to make sure that we have the right research. It seems like you have, the person who asked the question has seen and read quite a bit of that. What we're seeing has been for a bit of time now, has been the rise of uncivil society. So not civil, but uncivil society, meaning support for dictatorships. So we're seeing this in countries like Serbia, and I don't mean dictatorships, I mean more authoritative styles of democracy. So you're seeing this in the US, you're seeing this with the Poland leader who just won again, the Front National in France, Austria, Brazil, where you have people who could be considered not just very right, but almost extremist right, who are winning. And we have to be aware that disillusionment with democracy does not necessarily equal support for dictatorship. What it does mean is that people are disillusioned, people are unhappy, and we have been seeing these warning signs in democracies everywhere. The statistics are lower than ever. Public trust in institutions is lower than ever in many countries. But what it does say to us is that it is a good warning sign to be aware that not everybody thinks like us. You tend to be we're in a progressive conference right now. There are many fantastic conferences like this. When you go to university, you're surrounded by people who may think like you, and you have to be aware of that groupthink. Because even if you have very great ideas for changing the world, there are people who aren't represented, who may feel more resentful, who may feel left out, and who don't necessarily have access to the opportunities, and they may cause them to turn around or feel left behind, and then they turn over to the dark side, or they have different ideas. And so we have to, I think it was Leo said, we have to be able to be open and willing to listen to that. Education is crucial and very important. So that, when you mainstream education and you teach ideas about diversity, about why these thoughts, tolerance for diversity, why they're so important, that should be done in schools, that should be done in public spaces. But in addition to that, we have to be aware of ideas like xenophobia or homophobia, and we have to be able to combat them. And what that means, if you combat them, you end up in total partisanship. Like you look at the United States government right now, the left and the right are fighting each other in almost everything. If one side says the sky is blue, the other will say it's red, just to combat it. And so you have to be able to know and have skills for mediation and conflict resolution in your own personal life, to know how to listen to somebody who says something very different, how to meet them halfway, how to work with them and educate them. As Leo said, we have to be able and willing to work with people who think differently, because in groupthink, you don't need to convince the same people who we're talking to right now about what you're saying, they already know that's called preaching to the choir. What will make the difference is getting everybody else on your side. And that becomes our job, to make sure that people aren't left behind and that we have to have conversations, even with people who think differently, as difficult as that may be. You know, there are people who are Trump supporters and non-Trump supporters in the US, and they refuse to talk to each other, but they have to be able and willing to talk to each other. So we can't give up on that. Sorry, that was a bit difficult.
No, absolutely not. I think that was a really strong plea for more discussion culture. That was quite understandable. Thank you very much. Senna, you're the next on our list.
Yes, and I'm gonna give you more examples. So I thought I would complement what you've already said with education. If we take Brexit as an example, what we've seen is the reason why that wasn't a real process was because the majority of people weren't informed about what they were voting for. And that's the usual case that we see with a lot of these kind of referendums where people aren't really informed. And so an example is that a democracy organization in the UK actually did a citizen assembly with a lot of people in the UK and found that if you break the issue down and you really invite people to listen to experts, to actually formulate concrete reasons for why they're critical of the European Union and things like that, other information comes out when you break that down than just a yes or no vote. And so citizen assemblies is actually a very concrete method for how to create more informed decisions. And if to take another example that made me really happy in times where you feel very politically depressed towards what, you know, this right-wing current that our continent is going towards, is the Citizen Assembly in Ireland, where they gathered 99 randomly selected people, so 50% women, 50% men, people from living in the countryside and the urban side of the country, very mixed people. And what they saw was that they had a citizen assembly about abortion, which is a very sensitive issue, especially in Ireland. And what they saw was the majority of the people before they did a citizen assembly were against abortion. But after the citizen assembly, after finding people listening to experts to actually become informed about what they're deciding against or for, they changed completely, and they decided that they think that Ireland should legalize abortion, which was the reason, a big reason towards why they finally did that, legalize abortion. And that's the case with all citizen assemblies that I've seen, that usually no matter who you are, what you think, if you sit down, you listen to experts, you learn, you're in a room and you discuss and you get tools to have, clear discussions, you have facilitators and you have tools to have these hard discussions, people actually end up thinking very radical things, like all of these climate assemblies we've seen as well, where, radical climate laws, I don't think they're radical, but, laws that make sense. So I don't really, for me, to counter that depressive number of a lot of people being, having these opinions, I think it's about not being informed. So I agree what you've been saying before, and I think there are concrete ways of making people more informed.
Yeah. Okay.
If I could just say one very small point just to piggyback off of that on the concept of education informing people. What we've seen, and I work a little bit with international development, and in international development, we have experts coming in and talking to people who don't necessarily know people on the ground. What is most important is don't tell people what to think or what to do, just show them the facts, and then they will decide for themselves. So for example, with the example of female genital mutilation, for instance, extremely controversial, an abuse of human rights, a lot of people on the ground in many African countries think that that's okay and that that's normal. But the most effective ways to thwart this practice and to end it has been shown through evidence-based. When nonprofits go into certain countries, they speak with the local people, and then they have local champions who tell everybody else just the facts about female genital mutilation, the harm that it causes. They don't tell them do it or don't do it. And then people will change their opinions, and then they'll gradually stop working. And that has been the most effective way of stopping that practice. But when other organizations have come in and said, don't do it because it's terrible, it's bad, it's everything, people don't listen. They think it's just, propaganda from the Western world. So just tell people the facts, show them what they are, give them a chance, let them learn, and then they will decide for themselves. hopefully
Yeah.
right.
Thank you very much. Yes, absolutely. That is the principle also of the mentioned citizens' assemblies from Senna. I'm glad that you bring the example up because in this round here, so like Mehr Demokratie did 1.5 years ago an excursion to Ireland to learn more about the citizens' assemblies, and some people from that excursion we met in Ireland are in this round here, like Donald and Roslyn I saw. Yeah, which is pretty nice to see that here. I also have Jason now on the list here. So Jason, you're the next one. Unfortunately, I already have to tell you that we only have 7 minutes left for our discussion. So please bring your last questions into the chat so they have the chance that we speak about them. Jason, yes.
Yeah, I don't talk. I don't talk that long. I just remembered an article I've read about some month ago, and the scientists discussed this point: why are young people always I don't know if you say dictators, but he said they want to dissociate themselves from the society. They want, it's like a little bit okay, I'm now in a time where I think, okay, who am I and what want I be, and then I say, okay, this also, that's not my point, and so I'm dissociated from this, and I say, okay, I get a little bit radical and say, okay, I think it's also a little point of fear. So if I'm not sure who I am, if I don't know who I am in this world, what I really want, I'm going faster to some stronger points and say this is the only right way, and I'm not open for any others because I'm just the only one who's right and you're not. And I think that's also, as you say before, a matter of education, to give maybe them, or to give us young people a little bit to say, okay, that's a possibility to find yourself. And yes, if I think somebody who is grounded in his society, on himself, he also have not the possibility to go on a very right policy. And yeah, so I think it's important also for young people, not just educate them well, that's also on to give them like a little bit something to find themselves. And then I think they won't be that they say, okay, yes, we won't have free elections and just a dictator came to our land and such. Yeah, bullshit.
Okay, thank you. We thought, also we are also streaming this panel on YouTube, so you can watch it on YouTube. Caroline Vernein just wrote that in the chat right now. You can watch it tomorrow or the day after tomorrow. And we also have a comment on YouTube I'd like to share with you here, because the comment fits really good into our discussion right now. It's from Daniel Schilly, and he wrote, if young people do not find ideals, for example, in their schools and universities, they will look for the fairy tales of a strong leader. And yeah, I think if young people have joined us today, they would have found a lot of great examples. They could follow a lot of ideals. So if there are no questions anymore, we are a little bit earlier than 5:30, but I think it's a nice point now to close this discussion round. So I would say thank you very, very much to all the participants here, to all the panelists for sharing their experiences, and for technical moderation, especially Dana, plus the organization side from Democracy International, going from Caro to Anne to Max, Andreas, and so on. Can't name every one of you. So. Plus, if you, let me not forget that point because it's important. In 1 hour, we will go on with our next program point. It's about direct democracy and cycling path, because there have been a lot of great initiatives in that context. And yeah, you can just come back in 1 hour. The panel will be in this Zoom room here, so you do not have to leave. You can just chill here, grab something to eat or to drink, and in 1 hour we will go on with the next panel. Yeah, see you there probably.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye bye.